My name is John Winston Clarke. I was born in 1963. So I was born in Smethwick. So initially I was born in Dudley Road Hospital, which, as you know, is down in the bottom end of Smethwick. And I lived on Claremont Road, lived there all my life in the family home. So early in my life, my father wasn't around, so unfortunately my father passed away basically a week before my first birthday. So mother brought the five of us up. So I was the youngest of five siblings, living on Claremont Road in Smethwick, which at the time, as most people know, was quite a poor area. I mean, we have the history of the Rivers of Blood speech from down the council house. We have Malcolm X history as well, come to Smethwick. So it was quite an area of I suppose it was an area of mixed tensions, but it wasn't really an area where within that area we didn't get on. So there's Irish, Scottish, Jamaican, Africans, Asians, everywhere. And at school and on the street, we all lived as neighbours. So it was an interesting time to grow up because it was a very friendly and very community-spirited part of Birmingham, to be honest with you. And even now, looking back and speaking to friends who I'm still in contact with from all those years ago, they still remember the days where there was trouble everywhere. Also, you could go down the road to Handsworth or Winson Green, or go up to the Quinton, where the skinheads were there. But where we were in Smethwick was tend to be a little bit more. It's more of an understanding. People got together and got on a lot better, I think, in that area. So it's an interesting growing up. I say, without my dad, mum looking after her five children, she couldn't work. Initially, she used to work at Cadbury's, but we lived sufficiently. We didn't have anything. I think we finally got a colour TV probably about when I was probably 15. So we had black and white TVs. We didn't have central heating, so like most houses then, you had paraffin heaters and coal fires. And we took it in turns to, as they make the fire, clean the fires, light the lamps in the evenings. The good old days of you have a bath once a week, unless you've been doing something special or sports or something. So yeah, it was a typical upbringing for that time back in the 60s, early 70s, in a poor part of Birmingham. So schooling was, we were lucky. So again, because we lived on Claremont Road, we had a primary school, Waterloo Road Primary School, literally end of the road onto Edgbaston, up the top, and it was just there. So I went to Waterloo Road Primary School, and again, that was from people from all over. Same people on my street, the guys on the bottom of the street, from across the road, around the corner, 2 streets around. It was again that community school at Waterloo Road Primary School. So that was really good for those years, and it was really it's an interesting time of learning, I suppose, in that strange sense. I did well at school. Some will tell you I did very well at school because I was a trier. I always put effort into things. And Mum always told us, whatever you do, you're gonna have to do better than the average white guy, she used to say, because when you get further in life, you're gonna be in the same interview, but you have to stand out. Otherwise, you'll just get thrown onto the heap, effectively, as she'd say. So the primary school was a great experience. And actually, we learned a lot in primary school, and it was good. So it was educational, but also at home. I suppose Mum didn't have time, but my eldest sisters helped as well. Schooling at that time was like anything else. You played hard, went to the park after school, went down your back alleys. We used to have back alleys back in the days, back of the houses. You played down there with the neighbours' kids. Schooling was fun. It was an interesting time. So when I was at Waterloo Primary School, that was a time where behind the wall of the school, literally the wall, looking in front of our entrance, was a girls' school, which is Charlton Girls' School. And at that time, the boys' school was called Uplands Boys' School, which was about a mile and a half away. So when we finished primary school, that was then when we had the first year comprehensive system kick in. So I literally went from the primary school through the wall to what became Charlton High School, which is a comprehensive school. And that was basically, again, the same cohort, the same community at the Charlton School there. But we then split lessons between the Charlton High upper part where we were, and then we'd have to travel some science lessons to the other school. So you commuted between the two schools for different lessons at a time. And again, we did our O levels, and I did all right. I was actually moved up a year. So I was moved up a year because apparently I was doing really well. But it's an interesting one because I never remember that part of my history, which is strange now. it sounds strange, but it's my good buddy Don Subban, when he met my now wife years ago, we were talking, and he talked about this, and I remember sitting there, what are you on about, mate? He says, do you remember you got moved up a year in school, mate? And and I completely forgot that I got moved up a year. Not because of any other reason, and I just lived through the period of doing whatever you did. So I got moved up a year, and then I didn't leave a year early, but I just did more in that following year. So secondary school was good. It was run by a hard taskmaster, Archibald Hill. He used to wear a bowler hat. And Archie was on parade, then that was it, nothing. He's a scary man, but also a very fair man. So secondary school was fun. And then I went from there to sixth form college. So locally we had, it was West Medic College, but a few of us, about 3 or 4 of us decided, I didn't want to go locally, I wanted to do something different. So we decided to go to Raleigh Regis College. Yeah. So, interestingly enough, unlike the kids of today, and I'm talking about my own children who haven't got a clue, at that point I wanted to join the Air Force, and people say, well, if my mum was here now, God rest her soul, she'd say, let me ever do a type what was aeroplane. So I always talk about aircraft, aeroplanes, and I used to make models. So airfix models, I had dozens of airfix models, and really it was as sad as it is, and it's what it is I watched a film with John Wayne called The Flying Leathernecks. And he was a Marine Corps pilot, and they were basically called in to save the day when the poor Army, we know what about the Army being the Air Force. Army were in trouble, they called on the Air Force, and it was that close air support. And I thought, what a great role, what a great thing to be able to do is to do something where you help save the guys and girls who are in trouble on the ground. So that was my inspiration, really. So I'd always wanted to join the Air Force. I actually became a member of the Air Cadets. I joined the 494 Air Training Corps up at in Smethwick. I did that for a few years as well, which really sort of helped, I suppose, gave me that sort of confidence that actually it's something I really wanted to do. Went to summer camps, as you do with the cadets, came with RAF Cosford, went gliding, went flying in the Chipmunk, so all the little things there. Actually also went flying in the Puma. I actually had a trip in the Puma, which is the first helicopter I flew in, and again, it really sort of confirmed to me that that's actually something I wanted to do. But I always set my eyes on and sort of sights on wanting to fly. I want to fly. That was it. I want to fly, and that was it really. So through secondary school as well, and making sure I actually worked hard to try and get the grades. So if I remember correctly, at the time you just needed 5 O levels to commission and go into the flying world. So I left secondary school, then went to college to do my A levels at college. Went to Raleigh Regis, which was nowhere near Smethwick. It was a couple of bus rides away, miles away from anything that I knew I'd grown up with. And I went with a few of my friends, Don Subban, Harry Sharma, and Surinder. So 4 of us from our primary school, secondary school, went to a college miles away, rather than West Medic College, which was just down the road. And it was a good experience. It was somewhere different. The first time I'd really heard about heavy rock, which was a bizarre, awful sound of music. No disrespect to rockers in the room, because there are a few probably here right now. But it was the first time I experienced that. But it was a good mix of people came from Whalley High, there were people from Whiteheath, people from West Brom School. So there's a real mix of people who went to Raleigh Regis College. Whereas if I'd gone to local, again, it would have been primary school into same cohort for secondary school, same cohort again. So it was just a different experience for me. And actually it was a really good experience. It sort of broadened the people I met, the different classes of people. Again, and from different, Whalley High was quite posh. So we met some really still good friends today of people in Whalley High who were, they were slightly different up the social ladder than the poor people in Smethwick. So that was really my drive, really, from an early age. So I think it's a really interesting one. I think we'd always grown up, as you know, Caribbeans were very fond of the monarch, the Queen and country. And for me, when I joined, Queen and country wasn't just a statement, it was a thing, Queen and country. That's why you joined. You joined to serve the Queen and serve your country, because Britain was our country. Where it stood in the world, it was always up there at the top end. We had the big, powerful Americans, but we were a powerhouse in our own right, I think, as the UK. We had a strong armed forces. We had a well-respected air force across the globe. Even as a kid, I knew that. I watched all the war movies and saw how we operated. We were clearly economically well set up as well as a country. We talked about poverty and poor. Yes, we had poverty, but probably nothing on the scale of places which I've seen over the years in Africa, the Far East, even the Middle East at that time. There was poverty on another scale to what we were used to in the UK. But I think for England in its, well, Britain, that wasn't England, Britain in its role, we were seen more of as a peacemaker. There was this sense that we were in the right and we would support the right. I think that's kind of where it sat really for me as well. So I always thought that by joining the service, I'd be doing the good. I'd be doing, if somebody in the UK, fighting forces, fighting for the right. And I always felt that we were on the side of right, which is, again, one of the reasons why it suited me quite well. So as soon as I finished college, I went to college, and the plan was to do my A levels and then join the Air Force. So and I actually started or joined at 19. So I completed my college, and then I had a little bit of time, having gone to the careers office in Birmingham at the time. Went to the CIO, did my sort of the normal bits you want. So my initial joining was a little bit not where I wanted to go. Initially, I wanted to fly, and that was always my ambition. But when I went to the careers office and did the aptitude test and everything else, they said, yes, you have the aptitude for commissioning, but I had no service. They said, your service knowledge is poor. So my actual understanding of the day-to-day life of an officer, if I wanted to be one, which I wanted to be, I didn't really understand that and the process to get there. So yes, they said you can come in, but they recommended I join as an airman. And they directed me towards the Trade Group 12, which was Aerospace System Operator, ASO, with a small P, Trade Group 12. And the reason they directed me towards that trade was that was a trade where there were lots of young fighter controllers, flying officers who'd just come through officer training, been through fighter control school, and were just new. And actually the idea was that I could basically immerse myself in them, get to know them and understand what it would be like to be a junior officer and how they grew through. And to be honest with you, and to be completely fair, that's exactly how it worked. I agreed. I joined up as an ASO, or Trade Group 12 as it is. Went to West Drayton and London to do my training, RAF West Drayton, which was an interesting place. So sitting there in darkened rooms, watching radars going around, beep, beep, squeak, squeak. And then writing backwards, had to learn to write backwards as well, which was quite an interesting skill, which I still have. But writing backwards on big tote boards in operations centres and operations rooms. So I did that, completed my training, and I went to my first tour at RAF Neatishead, which is in Norfolk, on the fens in Norfolk, which is it's a post-World War II radar site, part of the UK Integrated Air Defence System. So that was my first tour in that side. So whilst it wasn't, again, as I said, it wasn't where I wanted to be, because I wanted to be an officer, they directed me into that path. But on my very first day, actually arriving at Neatishead, so we lived at Coltishall, then we got the bus in the morning to work in the radar site, which is remote. I was interviewed by a Fire Lieutenant Smith, and how many years later, and I still remember his name. I was marched in, sent down to his office, and on day one, he said to me, I believe from your records that you want to be commissioned, you want to become an officer and go onto an aircrew side. And I was quite shocked to actually think that this message had got from the Careers Information Office and the interview process to this gentleman sat in front of me while I'm standing to attention at his desk. And he said, well, we'll help you with that process. And true to his word and true to all the staff at RAF Neatishead, they helped me. Station Commander Group Captain Hopkins, the OC admin as well, they gave me mock interviews, told me what reading material I needed. They sat me down with the junior officers, so lots of junior officers would come to me and I'd sit down with them. They talked about their experiences, their training, and what sort of things they did. So I was supported massively in that process. To that end, and in my final year, I was moved out of Neatishead to Witton, where I went on to the 25 Squadron with Bloodhounds, which tells you, everyone who's watching this, how old I am. Went to Bloodhounds, but the reason for that was really to give me my last chance to really focus on preparing to go to officer training and go for my interviews. And actually, part of it as well, they wanted me to detach myself from some of my friends. I had some good, interesting friends who, I won't say his name, one of them, he loved a good fight. He loved a good scrap. He was an RAF boxer, but he loved a good scrap. And he was like, you probably need to detach yourself from some of your friends in the day-to-day social setting so you can prepare yourself for Cranwell. Still in touch with those guys now, by the way, which is quite interesting. But it was a move to sort of give me that time to focus on getting myself ready to prepare for those interviews, and which I was fortunate enough to do and received the letter saying you've been accepted for a permanent commission. And that's then where the story rolls into my commissioning side. That was on the RF College Cranmore up in Lincolnshire. So, and that in itself was an interesting one because you go from, so having done the airman training at Swinderby, so I went to Swinderby, I was in Leroy Block, I even still remember. Leroy Block, you have your room of, I don't know, 20, 24 people, bed packs, straight lines, sleeping on the floor so you didn't lie in your bed because of morning inspection, toothbrushes, cleaning around sinks and toilets, the whole works. But actually it wasn't awful because I think we were brought up quite tidy and knew how to clean. So actually for me, it wasn't awful at all. Ironing, it was quite an experience. It was hilarious, if I'm really honest, because it was only 6 weeks. And if you can't cope with 6 weeks of that, then quite frankly, you shouldn't join the military. But it's 6 weeks and it was just doing your stuff and just sucking it up and getting on with it, you know. Someone shout at you, you just say, yes, Sergeant, no, Sergeant, yes, Sergeant, no, Sergeant. You know, so, and actually an interesting one, which, you know, you may choose to use on this one. But when I was at airman training, two corporals, Corporal Hallett and Sergeant Cato, and they recognised I was the only black guy in, I think, the whole intake. And so we were all on parade on one of the early days. I can't remember the first or second day. One of the early days, 3 flights out on parade, and Sergeant Cato stood at the front, and everyone was standing to attention, and he said, along the lines of, "Most of you will notice we have a dark chap here. He's not a. If you want to call him anything, you may call him Chalky." Is that right, Chalky? Yes, Sergeant Cato. If I hear anyone call him anything other than that, or his name, if he likes you, you'll be off this training unit. End of story. You know, and you've got to level that. So he was trying to set a standard. Now, is Chalky acceptable? It's probably better than the other alternatives. But it was just this thing that he somehow felt that he had to make a point in that audience. And I'm not sure whether it was a good or bad point. You look back and you go, at the time, it's like people sort of, oh, crikey. But I had no problems with anybody on that entire setup there. So. Well, it's an interesting one to ask, actually. How did I feel? Because I grew up in Smethwick. You know, you grew up in the days of skinheads and rockers. You go into Birmingham City, you get abused on the bus, you get racial. It was, you know, getting racial slurs was nothing new. You just live with it. Mum always said, people can call you what they want as long as they don't touch you. And they said that, you know, as long as they don't touch you, let them have that. And people did that all the time. But in that, I suppose, in a more formal setting, which was Swinderby, I'd never been in that position before. I'd never been in a position where somebody was saying to people, "You're not allowed to do this. I don't want you to do this." The only thing you can do is, so it's like a halfway house between people just completely having freedom, which is everyday life, day-to-day life, and then now an environment where there was somebody who was there with his peak like that on his face, telling everyone there that this behaviour is not acceptable. So how did I feel? Probably confused, if I'm being honest with you. I just Sergeant Cato in that sort of airman day 2 standing to attention, like he actually knows who I am amongst all these people, and just nodded to it and cracked on. Yeah, it was an interesting one. Yeah. Cranmore was a different experience because you're now moving from. And this is probably the thing that people do see. You start in different messes. You start in number 1 mess, and you move on into different messes before you go to the college hall, the main one. So whenever you see a picture of RF Cranmore, there's the big posh mess, beautiful with the gates, stunning place. But you don't start there. You start in the porter cabins over there somewhere, you know, so that they can get rid of you steadily. And again, what you build in that, you build a bunch of friends and family, and they do become friends and family, even to this day. You go through this training. And again, I didn't experience any racism there. Now, was it there? Probably. Did I experience it? No, because again, one of my friends, you say, I deal with things. I'm good with words. I said, not to punch people. I'm good with words. And he said, you could disarm people by just a few words. He said, well, I didn't have that in my arsenal. He said, I could never do that. He just want to have a scrap or whatever it was, push him around. So I never experienced it. Whether it was there, it probably was there. Because again, I went through Cranwell, you look at those photographs of that IoT, 97 IoT, you see there's John Clarke there again, on his own. But what was interesting, I might have been the only black person, but there were people from Carlisle, Carlisle who speak like that, who don't speak like officers do. Manchester as well, Newcastle. So the isms of race didn't stand out at Cranwell because it was the isms of accent, which became more of a thing, because everyone expects officers to have this very plumb voice and very lovely. And you had a bunch of those who had that. But then you literally had the hockey playing Carlisle lass, Carol Postlethwaite. You had the Nichols of the world and it was so you had this sort of almost a grouping, which I was part of that grouping of the people who didn't fit what you'd expect to be coming through the door for officer training. So we actually became a nice little clan. That's why we sort of clanned up a bit, which was quite nice. And again, no one gave us a hard time but you could tell that there was a bit of a snobbery with some people like, do people speak like that? Where's Carlisle? And well, Carlisle's up here near, and all those accents became a thing more to define who you were than your colour as you went through, because it was that assumption that an officer has a plum in the mouth and comes from a certain background. And when you start digging into the backgrounds of some of the people at Cranwell, when I was there's a newspaper article in Telegraph that described Smethwick as a ghetto. And I remember walking around in one of the college halls going, I'm from a ghetto. Because it was like, Smethwick's described as ghetto. It's like, why is that? So definitions of colour then didn't matter. It was about where in the country you came from and what your accent was like at that stage. Yeah, it was but again, that was just within that small balloon of that training, because there's a bigger station there at Cranwell. There's a flying section there. There's a pure station. And this is the initial officer training group. Whatever happened there, I was not party to it. But I'm probably sure, like anywhere else, it would have existed there, racism at any level. So my career started as I commissioned. I went to NAV school, so I graduated from NAV school, which was up in Doncaster. I forgot the name of the airfield now. Finningley. So I went to RAF Finningley, and RAF Finningley at the time it ran training for navigators, and you ran navigator training, and it would then split you between fast jet or multi engines. It also ran pilot training for multi engines, so people who fly like the C-130, the Hercules, or then the VC-10, they also ended up going through RAF Finningley as well, because then the fast jet training was done at other locations. So that's what Finningley was. It had that mixture. It also did air and air crew as well. So it did load master training and things. So it was a mixture of air crew training, non-fast jet, if you like, at that stage. So I went to navigator training, and we all start the first part. We all do basic navigator training for the first part. And then you get to a stage where you then get streamed. So they decide whether you've got the aptitude for fast jets or you got the aptitude to go to rotary stroke multi-engine, and they then streamed you off to go. So we all did the first bit, then we got sent off separately to do different training, still at Finningley. Yeah. Right, so that's a good question. So when I left NETZ and I went to my commission, I then had to go back through the process of aptitude tests for pilot and for navigator. And I didn't pass I passed most of my aptitude tests for pilot, I have to say. But part of it I couldn't quite get was the dot flying kit and the dot in the middle. It's not computer based as it is today, it's a dot in the middle thing. So I didn't get that. But then I passed the aptitude for navigator, and then they said, we'll offer you navigator. So that's why I ended up down that stream. So having done the commission inside, it was like, before you get commissioned, it's like, well, what branch of officer are you going into? So I went for the flying branch, but I didn't quite get all my aptitude ticks for my pilot. So I ended up on the navigator side, which is why I then went down the stream for navigator, which actually was a good thing in the end, actually, I have to say. So when I finished, graduated from navigator training, so I ended up going on the fast jet side. I graduated and I was sent to the Tornado. So we have a graduation thing. And at the time, you could go Phantoms for air defense, and the F2, so laterally the F3, so the F2 as well was just coming out. So you could Phantoms or F2, you could go Buccaneers, or you could go Tornado GR1, which is a Tornado back in the day. So I wanted to go Phantom, even though I didn't want to go air defense, just because it's a beautiful airplane. No one can deny that. But I was never going to go that because I wasn't going on the air defense side, but I still wanted it. And then there's Buccaneers, and then the Tornado. I ended up going on the Tornado. So I was streamed to go into the Tornado and GR1 back in the day. So that's how I ended up on the Tornado Force. So then you go through so you finish nav school, you then have a few training courses before you actually even get to the Tornado conversion unit, before you even start that role. So I firstly went to RAF Brawley in South Wales onto the Hawk, the tactical weapons unit. So you spend a bit of time flying around in the Hawk, beautiful little airplane, as you know, dropping bombs, firing a gun, and actually learning low-level navigation in a much faster, slicker aircraft. Because you used to do it on the, they'll come back to me, but yeah, for the basic Hawk was slicker and it was quicker. So you flew faster, you flew lower, and so you did navigation at low level around Wales, because Brawley was in South Wales. You did weapons, air-to-ground weaponry, so gunfiring. You dropped some little bombs as well off that. So that was tactical weapons unit as part of your training. And that was just before you then go into your Tornado course. So that was sort of leave your nav school, and then off you go to Brawley and did that. And then you go to the Tornadoes. So the first Tornado training you go to used to be RAF Cottesmore, and it's a tri-national Tornado training establishment, and is where you had German, Italian, and the Brits. So the three nations that flew Tornadoes in Europe. Germany still flies them today. We all trained at the same base for our initial training. So you did basic training there for the conversion unit. So you convert onto the Tornado. You have a squadron run by the Germans, one by the Italians, and one by the Brits. And legend has it, the Italian squadron always finished early on Friday and drank wine, and the German squadron always finished early on a Friday and drank beer, and the Brits flew on to midnight. So how true that is, probably very true. Sadly, I was on the Brit squadron. So if you take back for the very first time, the first aircraft I flew was a Chipmunk, as I said, which we know is just a single prop thing. And then the Bulldog at nav training, you've gone the Bulldog for 4 sorties because it's small, it's a propeller driven, but it can spin like a spinny top. Horrible, actually. But it's a lovely aircraft to fly. And then you then move on, obviously, to faster aircraft. So the first real G-pulling aircraft was the Hawk. So the Hawk can pull, back in they could pull 9G. And it was a very good little fighter. Even though it's a trainer, it's a very good little fighter. But before you do that, you go through aviation medicine training. So you have to learn the M1 maneuver. So with your G-pants, how to force the blood from your legs back into your heart, and to your brain. So you maneuver, you squeeze. It's called the M1 maneuver. They still do it today as part of it. It's something you do, and it's just you squeeze and you tense to try and drive your blood back up, because otherwise G-force pulls your blood. So even pilots grey out, the blood drains from their brains, and it just pulls. So you're trying to force the blood back up. The G-pants squeezes. You try and emphasize that as well. We do an M1 maneuver to try and get the blood going so you don't pass out, or it limits. You can probably start greying out, but you still don't completely lose consciousness. But yeah, so you do a bit of G training, and then you go on the Hawk and you do 9G turns, 8G turns, and they're quite horrible. And there's nothing nice at all about it. But when you go into something like the Tornado, especially the bomber version, which I was the GR1 was a bomber versus the F3 and F2, you're limited in G because of the bombs and your tanks. So when you see the Tornado with its fuel tanks on, its electronic warfare kit, it can't pull 9G because it's got all these equipment. It's limited by equipment. So I never had to go through that 9G malarkey again. But once you dump the bombs and you dump fuel, if you had to survive, you throw your bombs off, you throw your tanks off, you could pull 7G, 7.5G. So again, you could go back into that regime. But the bomber was never a fighter, and you're limited by your weapons, basically, and what you're carrying on that platform as well at the time. So first tour went out to Germany. So my first tour was at Laarbruch in Germany on the reconnaissance. So a new unit formed by the Tornado. Jaguars were replaced. So we flew what we call the GR1A, which is A specified. It was reconnaissance aircraft. So it had built-in reconnaissance. And that's fantastic, flying around, new squadron. I was an ab initio, so the first new non-qualified or non-history pilot, so no hours before me, arrived there on the squadron. And another chap joined me called Neil Johnson. And then we had Wayne Hague and Jerry Spencer. So the 4 of us, who we still meet, saw them, the guys in February, were the ab initios on that squadron for the first 2 years. So we were coffee boy, broom sweeps. We were the dogs for the squadron for about 2.5 years when no one else arrived who was junior. But that was a fantastic time for us. We flew 3 times a day, most days. We were just flying hours. But in that time, we used to go to Dechi in Sardinia to do weapons. So even though we were a reconnaissance squadron, we still had our full weapons complement and training. We used to go to Dechi, and we used to do an exercise called is it Purple something, where you'd go to different NATO bases around Europe, and there's parts of the servicing. So you'd land at, say, Kiel, so that the German Navy could service your aircraft. And the idea was that any aircraft flying around during the Cold War could land at any base and at least get fueled and sent back home. So we went to the Canadian bases at La or Solingen, the French bases down near Trier. We'd go to the Dutch bases. With any of the NATO bases, you book in and you say, today I'm going to do a sortie, I'm going to end up in Volkel in Holland. And you go to Holland, you'd land, you'd have lunch, they'd turn your jet around, refuel it, they'd get a tick in the box, and you'd go home. So we used to do a lot of NATO traveling. I've been to States for weapons training, been to Red Flag, been to Canada as well for flying training in Canada. Been out to the Far East as well. Been to we used to Elon Osprey out of Butterworth and Penang out over the Far East, and then traveling Iceland, basically every NATO country probably at some point or other. Yeah, did a lot of traveling. I suppose it's always the place that's going to stand out is Gulf War II, which we operated out of Al Udeid in Qatar. Okay, so it's always going to be the highlight of any aviator's career is actually doing the thing that you've joined to do, is actually go to war. It was nothing like Gulf War I, which was quite horrendous. It was a lot tamer, I'd say, and that's the reality of it. But going to war as a leader of a formation, so you lead your formation. So I was flying with a guy called Hugh Smith, who was my pilot, and we led our formation from our squadron. I was on 617, the Dambusters Squadron at the time, and we led our formation on our missions. And that is a highlight of your career. If you're an aviator, to actually cross that border, leading your formation at night, to deliver your weapons against an enemy, and come home safely and bring your boys home, that is the highlight of you. That's your job, that's your role, and that's your responsibility. And actually, it was a joy to do that. And actually, whilst it was a war, no one's ever going to glorify that. The fact that you could go do your job in a professional way. People say that like it's something which we don't. But there are times where I saw some other nations who are probably less professional than the Brits. Not because I think the individuals wanted to be, but they had slightly different approaches to who the enemy was. The enemy is the enemy. But the enemy is the person who's trying to kill me. I'm going to try and defend and defeat him. But there are civilians there, and there are other people who are non-combatants who don't need to get involved in this if at all possible. So there are some attitudes and behaviours, I think, which have changed over the years for the better, I'd suggest as well. Yeah, I think they were lucky to get me, actually, if I'm being honest with you. Can you imagine for them, the icon? No, actually, it was. So my first squadron was 2 Squadron, which was long history. It's the oldest squadron in the Air Force. So it used to be an Army Air Corps. It used to be a balloon squadron back in the day. So my first squadron was the oldest squadron in true. So 2 AC, and AC stands for Army Corporation Squadron. So 2 brackets AC Squadron, and that went all the way back to the Royal Flying Corps. So that was actually a privilege to be on 2. Then my second tour was with 13 Squadron, and that was a new squadron, fairly new. So again, a young squadron, very young bunch of guys and girls there. The squadron boss, a guy called Mick Hetherington at the time, was about to leave the Air Force, so he had no axe to grind. He just wanted to have fun. So that was a tour of pure, unadulterated fun. And let's just leave it there. That was a great tour. And then I went from there to some other tours, but I ended up on 15 Squadron, which is the conversion unit training as an instructor. So I instructed on the OCU, which was then at Lossiemouth in Scotland, which I fell in love with. I fell in love with the place, absolutely fell in love with Scotland. On the OCU, and I was also then on the standards unit. And then when I did a staff tour, then went back to Lossiemouth, I went to 617, which was based at Lossiemouth at the time. So, and again, it was the history of 617, being a Dambuster. There's a lot of pride in that, especially as the first time I went to the association dinner, which is held at the Petwood Hotel in Lincolnshire, and there were the real articles from the Dambusters, the Les Munros, the Dave Knights, the real people who flew on those missions in World War II were there, sitting, drinking with you, shaking your hand, talking to you, buying you a beer, and to sit in that hallowed audience of men and warriors, and their families as well were there, kind of brought it home to you what being on 617 was, because they were real. These are the people that legends have talked about. The guy Gibson wasn't there, but all these people who did that were there. So it was a real honour. My boss at the time was Dave Robinson and then Al Monkman, and they were great guys, again, fantastic bosses, but they also took the whole thing very seriously as well and recognised that they were looking after a squadron which was burnt into history. And it was almost like the Queen's Squadron as well. 617 was very much like the Queen's Squadron as well. So there was an element of, Gulf War II finished. We'd only been home a minute and she came to visit Lossie to see Sixfoot. It was our anniversary, but she came up and she came to visit. People going, that's mad. You've only just got back. We were like, she's the Queen. She's ours. She can do what she wants. So again, it was an honour, and it really was. And it was a great squadron as well. Hence the reason why, as soon as the Tornado Force was retired, the first squadron for the new F-35 Lightning was 617. So the squadron lives on with the F-35 Lightning at Marham. So. As a personal colour, I'd say 99% of the people in my, again, I think, and I always emphasise it, in my sphere of where I lived and worked, it's really a microcosm of the wider Air Force, where there were issues, and I knew there were issues, but I didn't live in that sphere and I didn't work in that sphere. But the people that I worked with, mainly the aircrew guys on my squadrons, were, I'd say, sometimes overly protective. They knew that I was the black guy when we went abroad. We go to a German base or an American base. They knew that, and they would make sure that nothing ever reached me. If there was anything, and it became a bit ridiculous, because I kind of always say, guys, just chill out, man. It's what it is. Let people do their thing. People got a view. I like to hear it. I like to have a discussion and chat about what's going on. But they protected me more than probably I knew. So there may be more incidents than I can sit here and honestly go I ever saw, because they were like your picket ships doing their bits, because they felt, for whatever reason, because it's one of us. You're a family. You're going to fly and die with me. Don't matter what colour you are. If we get shot down together and die, we're going to die together. If we go into that sea together, we're going to. Because that's the life you live. It's not about just being in the Air Force together. Chances are you may die together. And your family's going to be at the same grave mourning you together. A number of Sunday dinners and birthdays and birthing parties I went to as a single bloke, just because I was on the squadron. Come around on Sunday because things cooking dinner, something's birthday. You'd go around there because even though you didn't have a family, you became part of their family. And that was much wider than I imagined it to be. So I think for me, the Air Force was everything I wanted it to be. There are sacrifices, and I've said this to some of my friends, you have to give up a lot to join the Air Force. We've joked about it in terms of, music and food. We're Caribbeans with Caribbean heritage. We love our food. We love our music. Music and food is the soul. You go to summer ball and you're listening to some terrible music. You're eating some very nice food, but there's nothing that you necessarily would want on your plate. But it's the culture of the Air Force. That's what the Air Force is. The Air Force is a culture. Parties and balls are sat around. They try and relive what happened, 30, 40, 50 years ago in their summer balls, but slightly upmarketed it. But so you still have the champagne fountains, all the glasses, because that's what they did 70 years ago. The fact that people don't drink champagne now is irrelevant. It's Prosecco in there because we can't afford it. It's irrelevant. But they try and maintain some of those traditions. And the music, they try and maintain the tradition rather than going in and having drum and bass and dropping some garage. They just don't do that. It's kind of set the scene of what it is. So it's culturally relevant to what the Air Force is, but it may not be culturally relevant to any individual in there. And for the Caribbean, it definitely wasn't culturally relevant to me, but I enjoyed it because it was what it was. That's what that statue was. It was a statue of the Air Force, not a statue of me or anyone in that room, with that Scotsman or the Irishman. It wasn't about us. It was about the Air Force. It represented the Air Force as a entity rather than the people in the Air Force. Yeah. So I started as an aircraftsman, and then I finished as a wing commander. So aircraft commander, then LSC and SAC, and then as a commissioned, started off as a flying officer. So pilot officer, normally the first level as a commissioned is pilot officer, but because I'd done time in the ranks, they recognised that, so I started one, basically not the very bottom, started one up at flying officer, and then I progressed from that through flying officer to flight lieutenant, squadron leader, and then wing commander. It wasn't all flying. There were tours I did some ground tours as a squad leader at High Wycombe, which was really good. So I did a tour there. So you're meant to do a staff tour as well as you go along your promotional role there. I did a ground tour as a flight lieutenant at Bruggen, and then I did 2 ground tours as wing commander. So I didn't do a flying tour as a wing commander squadron boss. I did a tour as a commander of a ground unit, which was known as the UK Air Support Operations Centre, which is based with the Army at Netheravon. So those were the sort of, you flow through over a period of time, end up as wing commander, which was exactly where I could have gone further. But I've never been, I didn't follow the standard path. You do this, you go staff college. I kind of enjoyed what I did. And I try to maintain a lot of who I am. You can lose yourself in any of these environments by aiming to be here and you just lose who you are. But I never wanted to do that. I always wanted to be me. And one of my bosses, a guy called Greg Bagnall, he once said, JC, he says, you're really good at what you do, but you have no gravitas. I went, sir, if I knew what that meant, I think I might be insulted. and he was, but he was, his point was, you do stuff, but you do it, you're serious, but you do it in a joking way, but that wasn't his way. Whereas I've been told by other people over the years, actually, I like the way you did that. It's a serious thing, but you deliver it in a way that people can actually feel actually you human. So, one man's view is like, and there's nothing wrong with you because he's a lovely chap. He's a really nice guy and still a friend. But people view you differently and how you come across is differently. So when I commanded the ASOC, the guys and girls who were there from the SACs all the way to squadron leaders worked for me, from Navy, Army, Air Corps guys, naval weapons guys, signals guys from the Army, our SACWs, we had a pilot, we had a mixture of people who I commanded, and they all said, you're the best boss we've had. They said, you've just managed all this mix of different services and age groups and sexes and that in a way that actually made everyone feel comfortable and happy. I will be brief. So my life after the RAF, I left the Air Force in 2011, and it was really, I'd got with my now wife, and it was one of those things where I'd been in the Air Force 29 years, and I think the longest I'd served was 3 years and 4 months in any one place. I was always moving around. And when I got with my wife Lorraine, she had 2 kids, so I had 7 years left. I thought that now means I could move another 3 times. And I thought, I don't want to move another 3 times. So I decided to leave. Not done that because I hated it, but it was a time for me because I wanted to do more of a family thing now. But the Air Force had a different view. They wanted me to go into another job where I'd probably get promoted next step because I was in a role called Air Land Integration. It was under an umbrella of Air Land Integration. So it's during the Afghan time where air support to land was a big thing and air support to maritime support. So the 3 services, looking at how air supports the 3 services in different areas. So there's a lot of money and a lot of buzzwords going around at that time. And it's like, well, actually for you, spending time with the Army, next step would be probably going to High Wycombe again, but into the joint area where you're going to work with the Army more. And I thought, yeah, it'd be fun, but actually didn't suit my personal circumstances, so I opted to leave at that point. I left and joined defence industry as an instructor. First of all, I went into the simulator. So I had a friend who runs the simulators for the Tornado Sims, and I managed to get a job at RF Marham, which is why I ended up over in Norfolk. It's where we live now. I did that for 4 years. And then one of my, colleagues from back in the Air Force days, who was now working in Civvy Street, he said, I think you could do this job here. So I met my then boss, who became my boss, a guy called Dave Black, in a coffee house, Costa Advertising. And he wanted me to wrap my arm around the air platform protection business. So I worked for Thales, which is a French company, but Thales UK is a branch of that. And it was about self-protection system for airborne platforms. So your chaff and flares and also your missile threat warning systems as well. So that became my baby for about 7 years as a subject matter expert and as a business lead. And then December last year, I decided I couldn't take it any further. I was tired. I did a lot of traveling. If you think I traveled in the Air Force, I travelled more with Thales than I did with the Air Force. and I just got tired, so I retired from that world. Okay, I think the first thing I'll say to anybody, people of colour or otherwise, know what you're going into. I think the Air Force is a different world now to what it was. I have some insight into it now, having spent a little time in the sim and still have some contacts through guys who are still serving. It's not the same Air Force that I joined, and so their attitude and aptitude. It's more about their attitude has got to fit with their expectations. And the example I'll give you is I recently did a Building Heroes course, which is fantastic. There are a couple of young army chaps who are leaving the army because they no longer believe that the UK's morality was right. We've talked about. I mentioned earlier that I always thought we were a force for good. We were always up there doing the right thing for the right time, protecting the little man, the small people. There were 3 of them actually who said that they no longer felt that the UK was doing that. They felt that the government's wars of choice, conflicts of choice, interventions of choice were not always in line with looking after the small people. And so anybody who wants to join today, I think they need to recognise that politicians will dictate when they're going to war. And you can't pick and choose if you're a serviceman whether you go or not. But you've got to recognise that it may not always be for Queen and country. I think that's the reality. There are wars of convenience or political wars, whatever we want to call it. But if people are joining for Queen and country, that may not always be what they're getting involved in. And so I think, to me, that would be I'd say that's a warning for me for people, is understand what you're joining. My niece has just joined up. She starts on the 12th of May. She's going as into the air loadie side of the house. But her dad's in the Air Force, so she knows what she's joining and she knows what she wants to do. But I think people need to join. It's not a job. If they think it's a job, don't join the military. It's a career, And the reason I say that again is my son was thinking of joining, but he was like, so when I finish, do you think if I finish at midday on a Friday and I go back? So no, you're there. You may be there on the weekend working. You may be training on the weekend. It's not a 9 to 5. The military is not a 9 to 5. So if you're looking for a job, you don't join the military. If you're looking for a career, you join the military. But it's a culture. You join a family, and that role may require you to work 21 days straight. You're a bitch and moan about it, but it may require to do that, and you may get 2 days off. But you can't suddenly go to a union because there's none. You can't complain because you've joined to do that. So I think people need to understand, people of colour or what you are joining and what you expect to get out of it. Versus, it's not a 9 to 5. No one's going to wake you up in the morning. You have to get yourself up. But they also have to recognise the opportunities that it gives them, and try and understand that. Be there. Say, if you want to be a pilot, it's like, what does that mean? Because again, discussion with my niece, what does being a pilot actually mean? Cause someone says I want to fly, you go, well, what does it mean? They probably wouldn't tell you. You need to understand what the roles and opportunities are, and actually spend time researching that, and go and visit. Visit an RS station, visit a naval base, go and visit a station and see the thing that you're thinking of. Don't just look at the internet, which people spend their life doing. I think you have to see, smell it, and touch it to get a real sense of what it's about. You go to a museum and you can touch and feel, then you know what that steel's about, that cold hard steel. Looking at it in a magazine isn't the same. And I think that's got to be one thing I'll say to anybody who wants to join. Go and visit, go and see. Meet people who are serving, meet people of colour who are serving, and talk to them about today's experience. My experience are different. Mine are years and years old. My expectations were different. Their expectations today are completely different to mine, or yours, in fact, on. But I'd say join. I'd say do it if you really want to. It's a hell of an experience. I've got air operations, Iraq. I've got Afghanistan. I've got a Gulf War II medal, Jubilee medal for the Queen, rest or so, and the MB as well on that side. So. Yeah, again, it was again through you grew up and you don't sort of realise what's on your doorstep, literally on your doorstep. I used to take Mum's ground rent book, and we used to have to, when you had a leasehold, you leasehold that. So you used to take the little book, walk around the corner, round about a park to the council house and pay the little ground rent. But it was that place where Enoch Powell did his Rivers of Blood speech. Enoch Powell, the big bad man of the day, was actually down the road at our council house, not even a quarter of a mile from our home. Where we lived. And actually, when you think about that, if you think, well, why was he there? Because where we live wasn't the heart of racial discontent. Was he trying to bring it there? Because as I said, we grew up in a very mixed community, but actually, trouble would come from outside, but not from within. So I never understood why he went there. But then again, years later, as I found out through reading Malcolm X's history, Malcolm X came down and stood in the same area and actually talked about the same thing as well. So to counter Enoch Powell. So Enoch Powell, as I'm sure people know, was a terrible racist back in the day. If you wanted for a neighbour, vote Labour or whatever, it was that sort of vitriol used to come out of his mouth. And Malcolm X came and tried to counter some of that stuff. But it just, you grew up in a place where you hadn't realised that actually there was an underlying history that literally sat, say less than a quarter mile from your house. But it didn't overflow in Smethwick, as I said, because for whatever reason it just didn't. We actually had a very harmonious relationship with all our neighbours of different colour, race, creed. School was absolutely fine. The teachers were fine as well. They were all locals as well. So we were probably a microcosm of a much greater. We're here, and I think if you stepped outside, then you probably find actually there's going to be more problems. We were lucky. Is it luck, or is it just because people didn't behave badly? You can make a choice on that one, really.